83.2. You had a story about Dave?
Well, this isn't really about Dave, but it's you'll see. I feel like I should say this because it's interesting to me anyway. Dave and I didn't hang out that much, but he knew that I felt bad that I hadn't joined the military. And actually, I did attempt to join the military 3 times after the wars with the in the Gulf began, and each time I was too old. So he had challenged me to join this very sort of odd military reserve in California called the California Military Reserve. He said, well, look, you know, if you want to do something, you could join that. And they didn't want me either. But the thought of that incident with him sitting over the table challenging me to do this came back to me, I think, probably right about the time that he died. So, I mean, I was thinking about it about a day ago, and I think that's when he passed. So it popped into my head because I mean, I almost never think about Rick's brother, so it's an odd coincidence. And once a week I do tarot cards for myself, and I was asking the tarot, I believe in tarot cards, and I was asking the tarot what I should do about a particular business thing. It's a certain decision I have to make. And the tarot cards gave me the death card. And that's the card with the skeleton on it. And I kept thinking, well, you know, Jesus, this business deal is not that serious. I mean, well, I don't know why the death card would be involved. And that was the same day that Dave died. And it
you got to stop with the cards. That's just
well. The thing is that having used the tarot cards for many years, I have found that the death card, when you get it, almost always means that someone around you is going to die.
Throw away that fucking card.
Well,
just get rid of it.
Well, you want to know, you know, you want to know the truth, so you don't keep, so you wouldn't ruin your deck. But I have found that whenever I've gotten the death card, it has either meant someone was going to die, occasionally it was the loss of a job or severe illness, somebody getting a stroke or something, within a day of getting the death card. And in this case, the way it's put is death crosses you. So it means that you were passive. Death passes through your life. And I got it the day that Dave died.
Maybe just mark the back of it so when it comes up you can stick it back into the deck without flipping it over or whatever the hell you do with it. All right. Dave was brave, and he was intrepid. He was politically conservative. But if he thought somebody was, like, for instance, he called up Gloria Allred, who's the lawyer who shows up anytime a woman is suing somebody for sexual abuse or harassment. There's a press conference, and Gloria Allred is the plaintiff's representative. And Dave thought she is interesting, so he called her up out of the blue and said, hey, I think you're interesting, let's have lunch. So they went out to lunch. And he did that a bunch. He was not afraid to approach people, and he was good at it.
How did he get her to go out to lunch with
I don't know. He was good on the phone. He was great on the phone. If he could impersonate a bunch of generals, he could talk, he could schmooze anybody. He joined the Friars Club, which is an organization he was a professional comedian. At the same time, he's a frickin' Marine, you know, a major and a lieutenant colonel, and I mean, a captain. And as he's working his way up the ranks, in the Marines, he's also working his way up the ranks in stand-up, getting better and better at that. Like, oh, so, and he was not afraid of pitching anybody. One time he visited me at the Man Show. And I say, do not pitch these people. Do not pitch Jimmy and Adam and the executive producer Daniel. Do not pitch them shit, because, you know, just don't. It'll make me look like a jackass for bringing you around. He's like, okay. So fine, he's hanging out. And then either Jimmy or Daniel says, hey, Rick, get in here. And I walk into the office, and there's Jimmy, and there's Adam, and there's Daniel, the executive producer, and my brother. And Jimmy says, you know, David's been pitching us this great idea. And we kind of like it, and we'd like to explore it. And they start talking about this idea, and I'm like, oh shit, this is just fucking not, I didn't want this at all. And it goes on for a few minutes, and then after like 5 minutes of going over this idea, which was not that great, everybody starts laughing at me, because what he'd done is he'd walked into their office and said, I'm Rick's brother. Rick is really afraid that I will pitch you some ideas. So let's fuck with Rick. Let's pretend that I pitched you these ideas and make him freak out. Which is great. He's... all right, you wanted some childhood stories.
Well, I actually have another Dave story.
Okay.
Dave actually was such a devout Jew that he he actually went to the trouble of putting a Jewish ornamental symbol on my front door.
You put a mezuzah?
Yeah, Jews, observant Jews have something called a mezuzah, which is a little symbolic ornament.
It's a box that contains a prayer scroll.
Yeah, and it's sort of like blesses the house, and so Dave hammered that up on my door. I mean, I was touched and kind of flabbergasted by it, but he thought he was doing a good deed, so he did that. He only dated Jewish women, as I understand it, after that period, which is a big sacrifice. That's almost as hard as joining the Marines.
No, it turns out that observant Jewish women are pretty hot.
Well, let's just leave that subject alone.
All right,
but anyway, so you had some childhood stories?
Well, before that,
yeah.
Rick, do you recall any of his jokes in the stand-up routine?
No, but if you want to see more about him, go to daverosner.com, I believe. Might be .org, but I think it's .com. Mm-hmm. Just Dave Rosner, no DAVEROSNER.com. And you can see a lot of his stuff. All right, so 11 months of the year, I didn't live with that family. I lived with my mom and my stepdad in Boulder, and then 1 month a year, I'd go live with my dad and my stepmom in Albuquerque. And I remember, shit I'd get up to with Dave. Like one time we had a hammer fight. We each had a hammer. And the idea was to see if you could hammer the other person, and we really didn't hurt each other. I think we hammered a desk that had a glass top and maybe chipped it. And another time he had a BB gun, and we were trying to see if we could shoot so precisely that we could shoot through the hole of a Winto green lifesaver. So we were shooting at lifesavers, and this was great for me because my family in Boulder was well behaved, and then my family down there was less well behaved, and we lived next door to the Hutchisons. And the Hutchisons were goody-goodies, and they were always appalled. And we lived between Hutchisons and the Shoemakers. And one time we got in trouble because we were supposed to pick up dog shit. And we didn't really want to do that. And we took the easy way out. And we just grabbed the dog shit with whatever we were using and threw it over the fence at the shoemakers. The shoemakers came out eventually, and they were each better behaved than the Rosners. We were like one of the, like the animal family on the block. And there was a bunch of poo smears down the side of their house. And then the Hutchisons, I got really excited if I was in Albuquerque for the 4th of July, because you could buy fireworks just at regular fireworks stands. And one time I had a whole bag of fireworks accidentally go up on the Hutchisons' lawn. And it was like $30, 25, I don't know, a bunch of, a huge bag of fireworks. And I look at the bag, I'm setting shit off, and then I look and there's a little tiny hole in the bag, a little burnt hole, and I'm like, oh shit, because that meant a spark had gotten onto and burnt through the bag, and all hell was going to break loose. So I kicked the bag over to the Hutchisons' lawn, and a significant amount of fireworks detonated on their lawn and left a big burnt patch. Like we did other stuff. We built a dummy. We took clothes and we stuffed it with newspaper, and then we waited for a car to go by and threw the dummy in front of the car.
Wow.
We took...
What happened?
They stopped, and then we'd run away, and they'd get out, and there'd be a dummy. Another time we took kite string and just stretched it across the street to see what would happen. And turns out that kite string would get caught up in a guy's axle, and the guy would eventually come to a stop, and he caught us, and we had to go out and look under his car and attempt to get the string loose, and there was not really any getting it loose, but it was. And then, as I said, I graduated from high school twice, in '78, and then I decided I needed to go back a few times. And when I went back to high school in '87, Dave went from being my younger brother to being my older brother. And that's really how it should have been growing up, in that I was socially clueless. I really needed an older sibling to tell me what was what. I was not supposed to be the eldest alpha sibling in a family. I didn't have enough clues, and I could tell, the last time I was in high school, that, my balls would have been, Dave busted my balls. Dave busted everybody's balls. He called me Rich Turd and Rich Nerd, and I think Rich Turd mostly. That ball busting would have been so helpful in getting me clues. By the time I was 9 years older than I should be in high school, it was too late, really. But I could tell that it would have been nice to have Dave. I mean, it wouldn't have been nice because I would have had my balls busted all the time, but it would have been overall super helpful to have him as an older brother.
I have something I want to say. As I've gotten older, I've had a lot of people die, and Dave, I'm still in shock because I think Dave was one of the more terrific people I know in my life. I wasn't very close to him, but he was a very impressive man, and bound for success. He was on Fox News. He was going to work at the Pentagon, and as I say, I've had to think a lot about what does it mean from a religious, because I'm religious, what does it mean when a really great person dies? And I have a theory that when very old people die, according to Jewish tradition, it's not a tragedy. It's not a tragedy when an old person dies because they've lived out their natural lifespan. And as I've gotten older, I've found out that there are some people it's better for the world that they're not alive anymore. So I don't even think death is all bad. It kind of depends on who dies. But
Can I add to that for 1 second?
Well, can I just finish my point, Rick?
Yep.
So, so the question with Dave is, he is a man that was in the middle of his life. When a child dies, it's not the child's fault. When an older person dies, it's sort of nature taking its course. But when somebody dies right in the middle of life, it's very shocking, especially if it happens quickly, as it did with Dave, without any warning. And I have developed a theory as to why good people die like that, from the standpoint of a spiritual person. And my theory is that we are not meant to be followers of heroes. And what that means is, when you have somebody that's really extraordinary and sort of a leader in your world, and all of us do, all of us are kind of, without realizing it consciously perhaps, we're all following somebody. Most of us have somebody that is an example to us, somebody that is our hero. And in a larger sense, Jesus is that figure for a lot of people. And I think that the reason that, among many reasons that Jesus died, is the same reason that people that are our leaders are taken from us in our personal lives. And that is that we're not meant to be followers. I think that you have to be your own Messiah. You have to be your own leader. So what, in my opinion, God does not want is for people to, in a way, live their span in life looking to someone else to be their leader. I think God wants us all to take that responsibility of being our own Messiah, being our own leader. And as I say, whenever somebody really great dies, I remind myself that this is a sign from God that I can't depend on anyone else to take me up to heaven, to enlighten me, to drag me along. That I have to be my own leader. I even find that, I'll tell a brief story if that's okay. Don't interrupt me. Because anyway, there was this couple I knew, and they were just the nicest people. And the wife was really the brains and the heart of the operation, and the husband was very passive and not as enlightened. And when they were in an accident together, she died. And I remember thinking to myself, as wonderful as she was, he needs this, because she will prop him up and carry him his whole life. And without her, he has to become his own man. He has to travel towards wisdom on his own. I first became interested in the subject of great people dying when...
Did he travel towards wisdom?
I don't know.
Okay.
I first became fascinated by this subject when my best friend died when I was 27. And he was a very, very powerful person. He was he was a famous rock musician. He was the drummer for Echo and the Bunnymen, which at one time was bigger than U2 back in the 1980s. And when I went to his funeral, I realized that everybody he knew was depending on him. Everybody he knew was his follower. He was pretty much the hero, not only because he was a rock star and a hero to fans, but a hero to everyone he knew. He had everything: brilliance, intelligence, he had a big heart, and he was sort of a messiah. And when I went to the funeral, I realized we were now all on our own. In a way, in a very, very benign way, he was holding all of us back, and that all of us had to now take over that place in our lives that he had become. We all had to fill that void now with our own efforts. So that's all I want to say as far as a sermon to those who die young that are good. So did you want to say something, Rick?
I forget what but anyway, just a couple more things about Dave.
Real quick in that vein, Rick.
Yeah.
But don't forget what you're going to say about Dave. I know we've talked about your view in the afterlife and in terms of your belief in God and being agnostic. I don't know if you thought about it much, but right now, I'm going to ask a question. What is your view like right now in terms of spirituality? Has this impacted you? Have you thought about that?
Well, I mean, my view in general is that it's our job as humans, as technologists and scientists and information processing beings, to take over the jobs that we've traditionally assigned to God as we develop the technology to do so. I've said before that Newton, in trying to understand and discover the principles that determine how the universe works, thought he was doing God's work. And I agree with that idea that we should strive, that God wants us to figure out the world. And it makes it extra sad that Dave has died at 53. One of the things Dave became was a futurologist, a guy who tries to look at technology and figure out what's going to happen. And my tendency is to try to do that too. And one of the things that's going to happen is you and I, as young boomers, we're among the, Gen Xers are now eligible to join the American Association of Retired Persons. You have to be 50 years old. And Gen Xers, the little shitheads that we have spent, we're the new generation following ours, they're now old enough for retirement benefits. Even so, young boomers such as us, I'm 58 and a half, you're about a year younger, we can look forward. We have a fairly good chance of still being alive into our 90s and even beyond that, thanks to improvements in medical technology. Dave at 53 certainly would have had, he had all these plans. He had a couple book pitches that were out. One was turning Albuquerque 2029 into a book and then into a TV or movie project. He had an agent for that. He had an agent to be a commentator on the news channels. He had at least one other book on political commentary. He had this new job doing intel at the Pentagon, and he was looking, at another 20, 30 years of paid productivity and maybe beyond that, because thanks to medical technology, it's not unreasonable that you and I and somebody Dave's age will make it to 100. So if we want to have our one argument of the night, life is less cheap now. It's more of a tragedy when somebody at 53 passes away than it was 100 years ago, because somebody at 53 could have another 50 years of life and another 30, 40 years of productive, healthy, vigorous life. So anyway, earlier this week, or just a couple days ago, a conservative judge down in Texas had ruled that all of Obamacare is now unconstitutional. Now, all the pundits, or 90% of the pundits, are saying, well, that's not going to fly. That will get knocked down as that decision passes through higher courts. But I got to say that given the power of current medical technology and the expensiveness of current and future medical technology, this is something that we have to get squared away, or it's going to be the source of all sorts of inequality, where rich people might be able to medical care themselves to live to 100 and 110, and then poorer people, and you're already seeing some of this, may pass away in their 70s and 80s. So if you're rich, you might be able to buy yourself an extra 20 or 25 or 30 years. And so to prevent that, that more than income inequality, mortality inequality is brutal and unfair. So,
well, typical socialist thinking. Rick's great fear is inequality. So, in order to keep there from being the dreaded inequality, Rick is willing to turn our healthcare system over to the government so that it'll be more like Britain and Venezuela and Russia and communist China and Cuba and all the other terrible socialist systems.
Can I just slightly? Some of
No,
those systems are better than others.
I'm so tired of you interrupting me every time I start talking.
All right,
I get this nervous thing because I know that if I go on and right when I'm about to make a point, I know you're going to interrupt me. I would just like to say that right now, the reason that medicine is so expensive is because it's got so many controls on it. It's true that hospitals gouge you by charging $100 for an aspirin. They all do that, and they hide it in your bill, and then they hand it over to the insurance companies who pay it. But I think that the creeping socialism that's in our system now is part of what has made it so difficult and expensive. For example, I don't think that you should have to get Medicare or medical insurance if you put in a 40-hour week by law in California anyway. I think the government should stay out of that. I mean, if people want to bargain for medical insurance when they apply for a job, fine. But if they want to just work 40 or 50 hours, like I have, I don't want to be prevented. It turns out that including the medical insurance with the job is what prevents a lot of people from getting more hours. I'd rather have the hours.
What you're saying is there's an hourly cutoff. If you work more than 30 hours a week, they have to provide.
Right, and I don't like the fact that the government stepped in and forced that to happen. I know that because it prevents people from working the number of hours they want. That companies just hire people for less hours. The other thing is that I know that Obamacare was beginning to create a kind of rationing. We were slowly turning into the British and socialist medical systems that they have in countries where you have to wait 6 months for a test and die waiting for it. There are, I could go on, but I think that the government mandates have made it more and more difficult for people to get health care. And I'll give you one example. One of the aspects of medicine that has gone way down in price is cosmetic surgery, just medical things to make you look better because it's elective. And so there are no insurance companies that cover it. And the government doesn't insist that you get, your breasts augmented or whatever. So as a result, there's competitive pricing on that. Capitalism, the system works. It's actually taken over and lowered the price, which is what would happen if the government would get out of medicine. Capitalism is almost always the cure for things. Now, before Rick interrupts me, I can feel the tension. I know that we have a safety net too, so that the extremely poor have always had, in California, we call it Medi-Cal. And so I've known several people that managed to get Medi-Cal, save their lives long before we had Obamacare, because they were extremely poor and they qualified for it. So we didn't need Obamacare for the extremely poor. And finally, I'd like to point out one other thing which will shock and horrify a socialist like Rick, and that is that inequality is a good thing. Because there has to be some benefit to, go ahead and walk down. The stairs are creaky in this place. There has to be some benefit to working hard and becoming rich. And because I'm a believer in capitalism and hard work, I understand that there's some rich people will work harder and make more money, and they will inevitably get better health care. And I'm not resentful of that. I think that as long as the government will save your life, if you're extremely poor and you have some life-threatening illness, I'm okay that the very rich can get the finest doctor. That's why they worked hard, and that's the benefit of the contributions they made to society that gave them the money to earn the best health care. It doesn't bother me.
The contributions that somebody made to society, not necessarily them. You're going to have a bunch of...
When somebody has more money, it usually means that they gave more to society.
Or they're the kids of somebody who did that.
Okay, but when you have those kids, your contribution to society made it possible for you to help your kids. That's the benefit of you working hard and selling things to people that they needed.
So I kind of think we don't disagree that much, except about the levels and degrees of stuff. One area of disagreement is, just according to what I've read, people in Canada and Great Britain are largely happy with their medical care. And then there are other countries you mentioned where, Cuba is a pretty messed up country, but I think that among the least messed up aspects of Cuba I don't know enough about Cuba, but I think medicine might be one of the lesser fucked up areas of Cuba. I don't know.
Well, I do know something about that. For decades, socialists have been American socialists have been saying, well, the great thing about Cuba is everyone knows how to read and everybody gets free medical care, and they've got this brilliant medical system. It turns out, no, actually, most of the people in Cuba are get very poor medicine. It turns out that only the Communist Party members and the high up people get the really fine medical care. As far as England and Canada, Canadians regularly cross the border to come to the U.S. because they have to wait months and months for operations. British people don't realize, like, they're continuously complaining about their health care. Their rate of dying from cancer is much higher than ours, from all diseases in Britain, because it's a poor medical system. America's, even though it's more capitalist, America has a much better system of keeping people alive than Britain or Canada. Statistically, British people die from cancer far more often, or in a far greater rate than Americans.
Our overall medical outcomes are less good than a lot of developed countries, especially when you factor in how much of our GDP we spend on medical care. But
well, that statistic is often based on infant mortality, and it's a little more complicated than that.
All right, so let me sum up, because where we don't disagree, I believe. Medical care is expensive, especially super modern, high-tech medical care. Can we agree on that?
Mm-hmm.
We can disagree about what role insurance companies play, where you would say that they're part of the system, and I would say that, but maybe they suck too much money out of everybody. But we can agree that medical care there's no getting around medical care being expensive. Now, maybe there are things that can be done to make it less expensive, but super fancy, super good care, like, for instance, personalized cancer therapy based on your own genome and the genome of the cancer cells that are invading you. That's some expensive-ass therapy. It'll get cheaper in the future, but every wave of new miracle medicine is initially going to cost out the butt, and that will mean all sorts of, there's no easy solution to the deal.
Well, the reason that we keep having these innovations, though, is because Americans are profiting. There's money in it. There's money in cures.
I don't disagree with that.
So anything you do to prevent American physicians and scientists, anything you do to prevent them from profiting, from making money off it, is going to squash innovation. And that's why the innovations don't come from China and Russia and Cuba. They come from the United States, because there's a profit motive.
Probably so. But where we would disagree is where the floor has to be in terms of medical services. And that floor, and I guess what I'm saying is that we got to figure out that the current system needs to be, well, whatever system of medicine and medical coverage we have will need to be constantly rejiggered as medicine grows in power and complexity. And so the floor is going to have to constantly be adjusted. For instance, do you agree that, like, having arterial bypass should be available to anybody who needs arterial bypass?
I think life-threatening illnesses are paid for by the U.S. government, so even the poorest people.
Yeah, so if
the government will fund things if your life is in danger.
So you're pretty much agreeing that if somebody's got a main artery, the widowmaker artery is 90 5% blocked, nobody should be denied them getting in there and cleaning out that artery or rerouting around the clog.
I don't think anybody is
All right.
based on poverty.
But hold on one sec. But the deal is that surgery wasn't even available 30 years ago. So if you'd suggested, or 40 years ago, if you'd suggested, in 1970 something, yeah, that guy's, he's looking pretty heart attack. You need to go in there and you need to root out that artery, or you need to take some veins from his leg and go around the artery. And the doctors are like, what? No, that's crazy experimental surgery. We don't do that. So the floor is always going to change, and we're always going to disagree where that floor should be. But it's a complicated frickin' mess.
Yeah. Is it possible that those innovations, they didn't happen in Cuba or Venezuela? Those innovations happened would you say a lot of innovations happened here in the U.S. because of the fact that the guy that comes up with innovations can get pretty wealthy? I mean, there's an incentive, right?
Yeah, I don't think any of us disagree with that.
Do you think that, do you folks feel that, like, I just bought another camera, right? And I finagled with the camera guy and stuff. Had Washington, D.C. got in the middle of that? Finagling, I think that it would have been like a much more difficult, and I would have never had a camera. And so do you feel that maybe, and this is for both of you guys, what if there could be more interaction between the patient and the doctor, and the doctor, saying, well, you know what, you can make this, you can have this, well, you can do it in payments. Do you think that maybe that has caused a rift and caused some of the problems that we're seeing today?
Well, I mean, you've got, maybe, I mean, because you have a whole third-party industry. You've got the patient, you have the doctors and the hospitals, and then you have the insurance companies. And, in physics, there's a thing called the three-body problem. The two-body problem is you've got two things and they orbit gravitationally, and you can perfectly predict how that system will work. And this is a bad analogy because it doesn't, but it comes to mind. With three bodies, that calculation's impossible. You can't predict how three bodies will orbit each other. And so by adding with three bodies working to figure out who's going to pay for this shit, because you mentioned the way hospitals bill you hugely, hoping that the insurance company will say okay, or will negotiate it down, but they don't expect the $100,000 bill to be fully paid. Either the insurance company's going to go, yeah, we'll give you 40 grand, or else the insurance company turns it down altogether, and the patient gets a bill for 100 grand and goes, I can't pay 100 grand, and then they negotiate that down to something like 30 grand or so. It's all a mess.
Could it be that they're compensating for the fact that now the government is funding so many people and giving small amount of payments to the doctors, to like people that are on Medicaid and Medicare, and so now the people that suffer are the ones that are actually buying insurance and stuff?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I do know what I think about the future. What I think about is growing organs in pigs. Now, this may or may not happen.
But before you go there, can we have Lance's response to it?
No, every doctor I know has told me that they hated Obamacare, and that they love cash patients, and that and from a personal standpoint, I want my doctors to be wealthy. It doesn't bother me. I want them to be wealthy. I want them to go. I want more and more people to go to medical school believing that if they graduate, they can become rich. Because it'll make more doctors, and if you have more doctors, the price goes down. I think that there are too few people allowed into medical school. The AMA controls that artificially, so that there are fewer and fewer doctors for the amount of people we have. I think that we could let nurses do things. We should, I believe Trump just passed a law that if you were a medic in the Army, you can also qualify as being a medic in the civilian world in America. If you don't need an advanced medical background in order to set a bone. I think people should be allowed to do minor medical procedures that aren't necessarily doctors. We could save money there. I also think that Trump did a beautiful thing for the veterans because they were dying waiting for medical treatment. I mean, thousands of them. And Trump was the one that came to save them. Obama neglected them, didn't do anything, and he said, I will help the veterans, and they got something passed now so that the veterans don't have to wait. If there's a doctor, if they can't see a Veterans Administration doctor, they can now they get a voucher to see any doctor in the area, so they don't have to die waiting. So in general, I think conservative policies, Trump, and capitalism, we need more of that to spread, to lower the prices in medicine. We need less socialism. I've said it 3 times, I'll say it a final time. If you think that the socialism in the Scandinavian countries has made their medical system really great for their citizens, just remember the U.S. taxpayer is paying for that because the Scandinavian countries don't really have armies to speak of. They're defended by the United States. So far in the world, the best medical system is the U.S. medical system, and rivaled by the Scandinavian countries that the U.S. taxpayer is paying for.
All right. Well, just to go back to in the future, it's possible that rich people will have personalized pigs, because pigs are very physiologically and genetically similar to humans, and you can grow organs in pigs that won't be rejected you can have your own genetically engineered personalized pig where you can grow a liver, kidneys, heart, lungs, probably brain tissue. And that shit, like an organ, if you grow in your personalized pig, will probably cost $200,000, as much as a house costs in some parts of the country. And, rich people are going to get these organs, at least at first, until, the cost comes down, or at least until they figure out how to grow the personalized organs not in pigs. And, as a general solution, there needs to be, people like to talk about bipartisan effort, but for the past 10 years and more, there's been no bipartisan push for figuring out solutions to the medical situation, where the Democrats came up with Obamacare, managed to get it passed, and the Republicans tried 70 times to get it thrown out. And so no bipartisan effort. It doesn't, but you suggest capitalist solutions. I've suggested some socialist components, but I've had more cosmetic surgery than just about anybody. I've had 13 sets of hair plugs. I've had a nose job, and I looked for the cheapest possible place. I was totally capitalist. One time I found a place that would offer, one time there was a teaser rate where they gave me 100 plugs for free. I went there and they were pissed because they expect you to get the 100 plugs and then pay for 500 more. But I'd already paid for 500, so I went in there and said,
Getting closer to this.
all right, I said, give me 100 of your free plugs. And they were pissed, and they did. Oh, by the way, you should check out, if you haven't seen it, Steve Miller's spray-on hair on today's news shows. Though by the time you see it, it'll be several days later. But just Google Stephen Miller hair. he went on news shows today with that spray-on hair, which spray-on hair is what you use when you still have some hair left to make your remaining hair look thicker. But he went ahead and he just sprayed himself a new hairline, or the makeup person who maybe didn't like him very much did. And anyway, it's ridiculous. Anyway, yeah, so I used capitalism. I followed the market, and I got the cheapest possible plugs, which usually worked and was still interesting when it didn't. But you with your mostly capitalist solutions, and me with my some capitalist and some socialist, I guess, if you want to call it that, solutions, haven't been able to meet for 10 years because there's been less bipartisanship in national politics. If we can work our way back from that, back to the more bipartisan, more cooperative times of the 80s and before, we might be able to come up with more nimble solutions to the coming wave of medical technology and how to pay for it. And that's all I got.
All right.
Rest in peace, my brother Dave.
I have just a minute. Dave was an Orthodox Jew, and I talked with a fellow that was working in hospice care, and I was sitting next to him at a party, and I said, I bet you that the people that believed in God accepted death a lot better than the atheists. And he said, actually, yeah, that's true. The atheists were extremely depressed, and the religious people handled it a lot better. And that doesn't mean that there's a God. It just means that in that circumstance, with the approach of death, religion was helpful in making these people happier. And I would just like to say that I think God in the afterlife rewards and punishes people based on whether they were good or bad, not whether they believed in God or not whether they were religious or not. But I do think that because Dave was an Orthodox Jew, I think when his soul recognized that it was his time, I think he probably passed more peacefully and is probably with the God that he always believed in, and is at home in the situation because of the faith he sustained, that he had in life. That's all I have to say about that.
I hope what you're saying is true. I know that he was found in bed, apparently peaceful. So even though you and I don't believe in the same amount of God in the world, I'm hoping, there's something that's not completely tragic in his early passing.
Because Rick, you were so close to your brother, and you really have astute thinking, and
Well,
you decided that, I'm sorry.
You're giving me too much credit, but okay.
But you decided you wanted to do the show anyway tonight, and I just think that's really brave of you. And is there anything, just lastly, that you'd like to tell your brother? Maybe you didn't have a chance to tell him, but he was possibly going to be in our show, and I really feel like his presence is here. And is there anything maybe that you would want to tell him that maybe you didn't have a chance to tell him?
I don't know. I wish I'd had more time. I thought, everybody always thinks that there's more time. And I wish I'd had more juice in the entertainment industry to get our shit made, particularly Albuquerque 2029. And I wish I'd had more pull to get him work in entertainment. And I mean, you know, I'll be second guessing myself about, like, if could I have accomplished anything more for him if I'd been more aggressive for him and possibly for myself. I've sat on my ass for the last 4 years, except for this show and except for pitching some projects. You know, if I'd worked harder, maybe I could have succeeded more for him and for myself, and that'll be a regret I'll be thinking about into the future.
I just wanted to say that in Taoism, they have a statement that to the superior man, that is the highly evolved spiritual man, it doesn't matter whether death comes early or late. He lives well, he bides his time, and what I just want to say is that Dave's death came early, but he lived it well. He lived his life beautifully, nobly. He was brave. He defended his country. He impressed everyone that knew him as a fine person. And I think that that's the way the spiritual community wants us to see it. It doesn't matter if you die early or late. If you lived your life well and morally and wisely, that's all that matters.
He did manage to do a lot of different stuff in his life. He lived in Israel for 9 months. He spent something like a year on the road as a touring stand-up comedian in Australia. There are no other U.S. Marine Corps lieutenant colonels who've done that. He was Marine Corps Reserve for much of his time, but he did a lot of stuff with the Marine Corps. At the same time, he went and he had other adventures, all over the world, and developed all these skills. And death is a motherfucker. All these skills should pass away in a night. And I look forward to future technology preventing, or forestalling more of these tragedies.
All right, we done?
All right, thank you.